Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 12, Week 6 Power Rankings, two-thirds of the way through, and we have a lot to talk about in terms of playoffs. We've got some clinches underway here. I am your host, IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant, and as always, I'm joined by SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Hey, everybody.
Let's talk about the trades for this week. It's all centered in Johto around two teams in particular. We had, first off, this trade here between the Steamrollers and the Psyducks. The Steamrollers grab Sandy Shocks from the Psyducks, and the Psyducks get the Steamrollers' Klefki over to their side. This was, I think, an abundance of riches for both teams, and both teams kind of liked what the other one had. This seems like a match made in heaven and pretty simple.
Yeah, really easy switch. They both already kind of have the primary assets of those Pokemon. The Steamrollers having a different priority screen setter and Grimmsnarl. The Psyducks already having different ground and electric types. Real easy swap to make. I do, myself, really like Sandy Shocks and think this is probably in the favor of the Steamrollers. But given the teams, it works out fairly well for both picking up aspects they'd like. That the other had plenty to spare of.
And do not underestimate the power of pettiness that Klefki was taken, mostly to prevent others from getting it. And thus, too, the Steamrollers followed that up by dropping their Rotom Heat that they had. They weren't really favoring it in favor of that Tauros Paldea Aqua, which can now break screens. As soon as he gives it up to someone else, Steve, he grabs something to break them easily.
Yeah, Tauros also a fantastic mon this generation. The Tauros Aqua and Blaze especially, providing some great typing, Intimidate, some other utility, as well as, of course, Tauros being one of Chad's premier picks. So, of course, looking to pick one of those better Tauroses up.
And, of course, it just makes sense, too, to swap out one Rotom for the better one that just became available. Rotom Fan out from the Psyducks in favor of the Heat. It is a second Fire type for them and doesn't really help anything with the Rock weakness they have a little bit of, but I think it works out just fine for the Psyducks.
Yeah, works out great. I know they weren't really a fan of Rotom Fan and were looking to upgrade their electric type. They had something else in mind, but then the Steamrollers dropped Rotom Heat, and it seemed like a perfect pickup to the Psyducks, so they went for it.
One Rotom to another, easy enough. And now we get to move on into a recap of what happened in Week 6. We knew this was going to be a good one, so glad we were right on that one. In Johto, the Lairon did not come away with the upset, but take a look how close they made it. A 1-0 win for the Steamrollers. Is that more indicative on the Lairon playing well or the Steamrollers slipping? Michael's feature match should give you some insight on that. Check out an in-depth look on this match on this channel. Next up, though, it was our 4 versus our 5 in a huge match with power ranking implications. It was the Route 1 Burbs who emerged victorious over the Cincinnati Incineroar with a quote-unquote 4-0. Annihilate setting up for free at first, then Salamence Intimidate triggering Defiant, but at least tanking the Drain Punch. But Hurricane doesn't miss this time, and Annihilate is down early. Palafin in next, and the baby goes down too, sacking the two Ubers. But it's time to turn the tables. Double Shock Palmot with a Revenge KO, then Iron Moth trying to revenge with Dazzling Gleam is thwarted by Electric Terra. Another Double Shock evens up the score, which is quickly taken back with the Chien-Pao Ice Shard. That's 5 straight turns with KOs very early. Garganachi time block. Salt Cure but Slowbro wearing that fancy cloak to avoid the residual. Garg low by the time it swaps out, and Rabska is in. Revival Blessing gives Palafin another shot. Swap in Palafin. Whirlwinded out by Tinglu, and then Tinglu can finish off Garganackle. Whirlwind out the Palafin again after Rabska falls asleep, and Flip Turn does over half to Tinglu. Fortress pivoting ground to Rabska now. Sleep Talk, oh no, it's that set. Revival Blessing hits, and Palmot is back, and then it's back asleep. Michael finally decides to abuse this by swapping in Lucario and Swords Dancing twice. You can bring back Annihilate, that's fine. Meteor Mash KOs Rabska, Extreme Speed KOs Palmot, Annihilate Drain Punch goes off, but it doesn't KO and even procs the weakness policy. Meteor Mash will pick up the KO on that. Close Combat in a Fortress, and then finally a Terra normal boosted Extreme Speed for those extra flash points to finish off Palafin again. A 4-0 for the Burbs as the team that took better advantage of the free turns given to the other. Next match, it's another one with serious playoff implications. The Summit County Psyducks continue to slide as the Music City Mudkips hop back into serious contention with a big win. This will be quick. Great Tusk sets up rocks and gets burned by Rotom. Slowking in next, Tanks hits easily, and Chilly Reception out into Titan. Klefki, no T-Wave. Reflect instead. Belly Drum, see Titan. Set up as many spikes as you want, Klefki. We'll click player off a few times until Reflect goes down, and then EQ to beat that. Excalibur is the answer to +6 Sea Titan with Terra Water, but Sea Titan's Terra Fire is, Fairy rather, is one step better. That's going to grab the immunity to Glaive Rush and KOs right back. Is it over? Gyarados Intimidate, but Ice Shard still KOs. Rotom Heat maybe. Player Off does over half, but Discharge fails to paralyze. It goes down. Ice Shard finishes off Iron Valiant, and EQ to finish to Dunsparce. That's a 6-0 sweep from Sea Titan and a huge W for the Mudkips. Finally, my Buffalo Bouffalant continued to roll a 6-0 drubbing of the mighty Miltanks. Just another page in the clinic the Bouffalant are putting on. Roaring Moon gets off the turn 1 Tailwind, but Wochan at least grabbed the Ruination to bring it to half. There's a good amount of pivoting afterwards, but then it's Amoonguss in who Terra's Water early. But Goldengo is the free switch in. Lots of chip on a Tauros, then both switch into other fire types. Arcanine Crunch counter Ceruledge quite well, though 2 of those finish it off. Back to Amoonguss, back to Goldengo. Rain Dance Amoonguss, very cool, but Tauros is sacked on the swap. Low kicks in, 49% to Arcanine after Intimidate. Wow. Flay Ruff will KO the Roaring Moon switch in, though. Then Goldengo in on the Weather Ball from Kilowattrel. U-turn into Amoonguss, bad news. Substitute on Goldengo. Then Nasty Plot. His Energy Ball doesn't break the sub. Shadow Ball takes care of Kilo. Low kicks breaks the sub, but it is Goldengo, not Amoonguss, that will make it rain. Another couple Shadow Balls finish off that final Amoonguss. That's a 6-0 win. Goldengo matches Azu and Gengar and Johto. It's 10 KOs for the lead. And with the Adams Pidgey Emporium on bye, that is what happened in the Johto Conference. In Paldea, the big matchup this time, the Akron Agrons and the Wooper Troopers, but the Agrons send a message with a 4-0 win. Annihilate U-turns out as Bronzong and Clodsire trade rocks, then it's back into block spin, but instead gets his lefties knocked off. Toadscroll into spin too, but there's Ice Shard from Don's fan, but Yachi buried. Toadscroll survives and Leafstorm claims the first KO of the match. Tinkaton in on Screamtail, but Reflect goes up. Electros in next. Tinkaton Swords Dancing into a Brick Break to rid the field of screens, but Electros wearing those choice spectacles. Flamethrower Okos Tinkaton, very nice. Ironthorn D-dances and Terra Fairies before Rock Blast hits 5 times to KO Screamtail. What are the odds? Wink, wink. Then Skeldurge in with a Terra Fairy as well, helping it survive the Rock Blast. Then Will-O-Wisp to neuter the Mecha T-Tar and heal up. Torch Song crits Arcanine, who's used to being crit by this point, and then crits back with E-Speed. But Slack Off Skeldurge is starting to get scary, KOing Ironthorns and Toadscroll to move up to +4. Arcanine down to rocks. Annihilate can try, but it'll also fall victim to Torch Song. And you know Bronzong's susceptible to a Skeldurge sweep from nowhere, and a 4-0 win. Next up, the Boulder is still trying to claw and scratch his way into the power rankings, and maybe this 3-0 win over the Close Combat Club can convince us. Talonflame starts with a couple banded Brave Birds to down to Dunsparce, say that 5 times fast. Volcarona sets up Tailwind, but crazy, but banded EQ from Tinglu will Oko Iron Hands. That is hard to do. Palafin into Revenge. Close Combat does big damage to Gastrodon, but the Terra Ghost to immune the choice-locked fighting move. Earth Power chunks Iron Treads big, too. Volcarona out. Overheat misses, though. Morning Sun Recover, though, both are full. We can pretend that never happened. Overheat does 55% to Gastro, but Mirror Coat does all of Volcarona's health. This thing cannot be stopped unless it's spored. Yeah, that's fair. But King Gambit's in. +2 Kowtow Cleave KOs Amoonguss. Palafin Jet Punch doesn't KO, but it out-prioritizes Sucker Punch. Gastro swaps in. Iron Treads Terra Grounds, and then Gastrodon is sacked. Not sure that was the play. Talonflame finishes off Iron Treads with U-turn, then Hatterini in. Healing Wish to bring back Talonflame, but Brave Bird doesn't OHKO, so Jet Punch KOs that. Suddenly, where's the Jet Punch answer? Iron Valiant is not crit. Thunderbolt KOs, and we avoid the worst case scenario. No throw here. Instead, a couple of turns away from being a very, very clean win. Next up, I don't know what's expected at this point. It's a 6-0 from the Newport Noctowls, this one against the Zanesville Zigzagoons. The early Vortex, Volt Switch Rotom into U-turn, Scarf Hydreigon into Dondozo to wall the Calm Minding Espeon. Goldengo takes about half swapping in, then gives Iron Moth a choice specs. I'll take that, thank you very much. Goodbye Garganacci, as Energy Ball does so much. Espeon does a little chip but falls too. Pelipper out. Rotom Volt Switch takes care of that. U-turn out of Mimikyu to break the disguise. Swords Dance is doing anything in front of unaware Dondozo anyways. Player off doing nothing, and Waterfall plus Life or Recoil finishes that. Is Braylon the answer? Headlong Rush does a bit, but Close Combat finishes it off. That thing is fast. Goldengo, the only one left, doesn't outspeed either. Headlong Rush finishes that off too. So that's the clinical 6-0. Finally, the Waterdeep Wobbuffets cleaning up to a 5-0 win over the Kanto Kinglers. Turn 1 is a dance party. Gyarados, then Dragonite, each clicking Dragon Dance. Only one of you is a dragon, though. Gyarados first. Stone Edge does 61%, but procs Weakness Policy. Then Dragonclaw Okos Gyarados back. That one wins the dance-off. Slowbro tanks in, returning T-Waves the Dragonite there, but despite that, Fire Punch will KO the Corviknight follow-up. Can this thing be stopped? Slowbro can Future Sight though, and Weavile's in for that. Slitherwing is in at the same time. Very good trying to get that pressure on, but there's a Protect on Weavile. That helps, stops the Bug move in the Future Sight thanks to the Dark typing. Torkoal in next, powering up the Slitherwing, but it's probably worth as Sandy Shocks gets the boost too. Photosynthesis boost, Protosynthesis rather, Terra Electric, Thunderbolt against Salamence, still doesn't OHKO. EQ will KO, and with Salamence at +2/+1, it's poised to sweep, right? Chlorophyll Scoville and outspeeds and KOs with Flamethrower, then Solar Beam KOs Slowbro, and then Flamethrower brings Low Kick to the Sash, but Low Kick's Leech Life doesn't KO back. It's still alive. Sun runs out, but Torkoal back up. Low Kicks tries to take advantage of switching around, but Torkoal can just Lava Plume a couple times to finish off Low Kicks and the Slitherwing. Those two bugs are gone. A 5-0 win for you, Steve. And with Quiet Majesty on by, that is what happened in the Paldean Conference. A lot of craziness going on. I'm sure you're expecting some big shakeups in the power rankings, but spoiler here, really not that much here. The one thing we do want to celebrate first, though, at the top, the Seattle Steamrollers, who do hang on to that top spot after a well-fought win. The first team over in Johto with 5 wins, and thus clinching a playoff spot. Very impressive season, Steve.
Yeah, they are doing fantastic. They had 1 week where things were a little off for them, but outside of that, very strong performances, and getting the first team in the conference to get to 5 wins and locking up that playoff spot.
And a W against one of the other top teams here, too, in the Lairon, so big shout-out to that. I suppose we should talk a little bit about the Bouffalant. We are 1 game behind the Steamrollers in the win column only because we have had our bye and the Steamrollers have not. But the Bouffalant, I don't want to toot my own horn too much here, but in the last 4 weeks, only 2 Mons have been KO'd. It's not been against the best competition, but that does include the Burps in there too. So what do we think about the Bouffalant and their chances of moving up to maybe even surpass the Steamrollers in the near future?
This was definitely a discussion, particularly this week. Steamrollers, with a close win to the Lairon after a big loss to the Burbs. Maybe the Bouffalant move ahead. But right at this moment, we're ranking them fairly evenly. But next week is really an opportunity for the Bouffalant to get ahead, as the Steamrollers will have their bye in week 7. With both teams having equal games, it will feel appropriate for whichever team we think has had a better season at that point, assuming the Bouffalant win, to have that number 1 spot. Of course, if there is a loss by the Bouffalant, then there's really no question in that week anymore either. But that seemed like a logical time to switch up the number 1, depending on how this and past weeks have gone once the games played are even.
And that's really setting up for the Week 9 showdown at the end of the season between those top 2 teams, which could be a lot of fun. Past that, we have a few teams here at 3-2. The Lairon did just lose, but it was a well-fought, very close 1-0 to the top team, as opposed to the Burbs and their victory over the Incineroar. So we did actually keep them up at number 3, still impressing us and very close to walking away with a W against a big team. Talk to us a little bit then about the Lairon at 3, the Burbs at 4, and the team that just missed the cut here. The Music City Mudkip sneaking up a little bit at 3-2 there, but just missing the cut here.
Yeah, so the Lairon were the clear 3 going into this week, and playing the what has been the dominant number 1 to a 0-1 loss is still quite impressive. They've had a great season, picking up wins over the Burbs at 4 in week 1, and all in all have done very well this season. Excited to see how the rest of their season goes, especially their week 8 matchup against the Bouffalant, I think will be quite telling. But because of that, we feel like the Lairon are kind of in control. Some losses on their end to some of these non-top teams may shift them down a little bit, but they're definitely in a great position moving forward. The Burbs, of course, after a not great start to the season, have really brought things back up to 3-2. Big win this week over the Incineroar. On the up and up, historically strong team, back-to-back champ. But still falling a little short, in our opinion, to the Lairon, especially with the head-to-head win going the other way in week 1. Still, we think the Burbs are the team who are in the right trajectory and looking the best of those 3-2 teams, or other teams in general. I guess the Lairon are 3-2. I just view them as a little more. But yeah, second best team, I guess, of the 3-2 teams. Team on the right trajectory. So that's where we went there. We mentioned the Mudkips kind of getting very close here. The Mudkips getting a big 6-0 win against the falling Psyducks, now 3-3. So the Mudkips are in a great spot. They do have a very tough schedule ahead of them with games against the Buffalo Bouffalant, Seattle Steamrollers, and Route 1 Burbs. 3 of the teams we've ranked in the top 4, and the top 3 teams based on preseason expectations. So a very difficult path ahead of the Mudkips, really bringing them down in the rankings.
And so that gives them a lot of opportunity to move up, but also means that the team we really had in discussion to potentially compete there for number 5, do not count the Incineroar out. What do you think of that?
Yeah, the Incineroar are in a fantastic spot. Although they don't have a 3-win record like so many other teams in this conference, they have a little bit of an easier schedule towards the end of the season and could very easily sneak into that 5th spot, maybe playing to get a play-in game in the last week or so. They got games against the Lairon, the Pidgey Emporium, and the Psyducks. The Lairon, of course, being up here towards the top, a key match for them. The Emporium having a rough season, and the Psyducks currently falling. So the Incineroar have a clear path in. They just need to get the wins to get there.
And speaking of that, we should go over the playoff odds a little bit. See that check mark next to the Steamrollers, that is a 100% chance to make it. Congrats to them again. But we're starting to get close with a couple other teams, and I think more so the amount of wins needed to get in is starting to become a little bit more clear here. Maybe less so in Johto than Paldea, but what do you have for us, Steve?
So you mentioned the Steamrollers getting to 5 wins. They're at 100%. They are guaranteed to make it to the playoffs. Outside of that, the next closest is the only 4-win team in the conference, the Buffalo Bouffalant, currently at 94.5%, up 10% from last week. Looking real strong, even losing out and staying at 4 wins. They're still favored to make it in. 4 wins could be enough. It'll be 4 or 5 wins, kind of being the way to get it. 5 wins should basically guarantee it for anyone at this point. So the Bouffalant just need a win or just a lot of help with a lot of losses. Either way, looking very accomplished, very easy to do. As for a bunch of our teams at 3-2, the Lairon, the Mudkips, and the Burbs all have about 70% odds. The Lairon at 72.4, Music City Mudkips at 71.2, and the Route 1 Burbs at 70.5. All of them very close, as they all have the same record, all now fairly even. The difficulty in schedule, of course, is not factored in. So we mentioned like the Mudkips have a very difficult schedule ahead. So them getting the necessary wins to advance is really difficult. But for any of these teams, 1 win is going to feel very good, and the second win should lock it. So if any of these teams can get 2 more of those wins, they should be fine. That also applies to the Psyducks, currently at exactly 50% chance to make it in. That is, however, 20% lower than where they were at last week. At 3-3, they still have their bye to go. Same thing as the other teams with 3 wins, though. 1 win will feel good. 2 wins will be a lock. The issue is they only have 2 games to do that in, as opposed to 3 games like the other teams we discussed. Outside of that, the Incineroar at 32.2%, down 20% after their loss. They, have a very reasonable schedule to make it in. They'll just need to pick up the performance here. We have Adams Pidgey Emporium at 7.2%. Not much of a change. I believe they had the bye last week, so didn't really impact their playoff odds. With only 1 win so far, they do particularly need to win out, more or less. Getting to there is a possibility 3 wins could do it, whereas they only win 2 of their next 3, but it likely requires winning all 3 to get in. And even then, it's not guaranteed. So Emporium kind of hoping a lot here, needs some big performances. And then at the end, the Miltanks still at 0%, but they have lost those couple ways they had in. They are officially out of playoff contention.
This shame. There were a couple of weeks in there where I think the Miltanks were on the cusp of breaking through there. I think against the Psyducks in particular was such a close game there. But that's where we're standing at with Johto. So now we get to move on to Paldea, and big surprise, actually no changes over here either, though once again we need to acknowledge that the Noctels have been the first to clinch playoffs over in Paldea. Congratulations to them, Steve.
Yeah, getting it in at 5-0. They're a very strong team, of course. only undefeated team in both conferences at this point. They've just, had a great season. They have some stiff competition coming up. Of course, games against the Agrons this week, also against the Wobbuffets at the end of the season. So some tougher games coming up, but certainly they can handle it, and they'll be a favorite heading into the postseason.
Speaking of teams with tough schedules, we do have a little bit separated. Is the Agrons being at 4-1, a 4-win team with an 80% win rate here? But boy, does their schedule look tough the rest of the way. What are we looking at with them?
Yeah, the Agrons' remaining schedule is very similar to the Mudkip schedule, where they have to play the Newport Noctowls, the Waterdeep Wobbuffets, and then the Close Combat Club. The club haven't been doing great this season, but they're still a historically strong team, as well as, admittedly, the shaky Wobbuffets this season and the Noctowls. Kind of their expected 3 hardest matchups here to close the season. Someone in the schedule really wanted to emphasize Joe's ability to start strong and end weak, but maybe it was an accident, maybe not.
And then we have another little cluster down here, similar to the other conference there, with 3, 4, and 5. We did keep them in the same order. Again, here, Quiet Majesty on the bye. Didn't really get to do anything to show anything different, but their schedule is looking pretty favorable. And then the Wobbuffets we keep at 4 and 2. 4 wins is a big deal here. We have them slightly below the Majesty, which we'll get into. And there is a team that just keeps on trying to poke in just a little bit. The Boulder Boulders with another win, just remaining on the outside there at 5. Tell us about why we ranked the Majesty, Wobbuffets, and Boulders in that order.
So, the Majesty, of course, being a win behind the Wobbuffets, but already having their bye and having a much easier schedule going forward. They have yet to play some of the teams that have really been struggling this season, like the Kanto Kinglers and the Zanesville Zigzagoons. So with a couple of wins that should be a little easier to come by, as well as the head-to-head win over the Wobbuffets, Quiet Majesty seemed like a clear choice still at number 3. Admittedly close, but it's going to take more than not playing a week for Wobbuffets to get that ground back. It'll likely take a Majesty loss for the Wobbuffets to regain that ground. Looking at the Wobbuffets, we mentioned it, 4 wins. 4 wins is a really key number. It means there are significant ways the team can get into the playoffs without winning any more games, which might come up to the Wobbuffets, as their only remaining games are against the Agrons and the Noctowls, the 1 and 2 seed for a while, the 1 and 2 performing teams for most of the season here. Difficult matches ahead, but they do have the 4 wins to nearly give themselves a guarantee into the playoffs. Of course, things can still go awry, but a win will lock them in, or other matches going their way. And you mentioned the Boulders, right on the heels of these other teams, getting some big wins here. Wins over the Agrons last week, especially the club this week. They're right in consideration. They're just a little bit slower start to the season, just keeping them a step behind. But if they pick up some more big wins here to close out the season, it would not be a shock to see them in the playoffs and upsetting some teams along the way.
And speaking of, we get to go over some of those playoff odds again. The Noctowls at 100%, and past that, I assume we're getting some relatively similar numbers to Johto. What do you see?
Yep, very similar numbers. The Akron Agrons at 97.7, up 8% from last week. Again, having 4 wins, also only 1 loss. Still, have already had their bye, so 3 weeks to get at least 1 more win seems like nearly a guarantee at this point. The Wobbuffets at 95.3, up 13%. That 4th win is big. Plenty of ways for them to still make it in, but not guaranteed yet. A little bit of a group here for the 3 and 2 teams, with Quiet Majesty at 73.7 and the Boulder Boulders at 73.7. Quiet Majesty, notably on their bye, going down 8% in their playoff odds. Just especially with the Boulders winning and getting in range to throw the Majesty out. These 2 teams also have not played yet this season, so that'll be a key matchup, I believe, in not next week, but the following week. So keep your eyes out for that. Outside of these top 5 teams, the playoff odds are not looking very good. The Wooper Troopers, with a loss this week, have dropped 30 points down to 13.7. They have, big win over the Wobbuffets, but they're really going to need some help at this point now that they have 4 losses, going to need to get to 4-4 and hope the 4th place team is held to such a ranking. Kanto Kinglers down 20 points to 8.6%. They're a 1-win team. They definitely need to win out, get to that 4-4 to make it in. 4 wins will be needed, definitely in the Paldea conference. It is guaranteed at this point. So need to win out to make it there. Similarly, the Close Combat Club at 6.3%, also down 20% from last week. Similarly, need at 1-4, 3 games left, need 3 wins to make it in. Both the Kanto Kinglers and Club, really key matchups coming up, and a loss will eliminate them. And finally, we get to the Zanesville Zigzagoons at 0%, down 10% from last week. And with their loss this week, they are eliminated from the playoffs. Unlike the other 1-win teams, the Zigzagoons have not yet had their bye. They are currently 1-5 with only 2 games remaining. Only being able to get up to 3 wins will not be enough to make it. So the Zigzagoons will not be making the postseason.
We did have an exciting couple of games in there, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. And speaking of that too, we get to move on to see what is in store for us in Week 7. Yeah, we're really chugging along now, and with the Johto having the feature match, I get to first point out my favorite game here, which is going to be the Incineroar and the Lairon. We talked about the Lairon at number 3 and how they're going to continue to need to rack up some of those big wins. They have at least 1 or 2 other pretty tough games coming up here. I know that I still have yet to play them, so a big win over the Incineroar would do a lot for them to try to get up to 4. And similarly, the Incineroar are still in it, and this is a great way to prove that they are and really start to shake up the rankings here a little bit. What else in Johto interests you, Steve?
Looking at the matchup between the Burbs and the Psyducks is catching my eye. The Psyducks, a team currently in free fall after a very strong start, losing 3 in a row now. The Burbs having kind of the opposite story, losing their first 2 and then winning 3 in a row. The 2 teams are meeting now. We'll see if they stay on the same trajectory or if their fates will switch once again. Both teams, of course, still in it and need every win they can get to get into the playoffs.
Always fun to see one of the teams get 4 wins, and those 2 games especially really interplaying with each other. All 4 of those teams going to want to know the result of the other match there. And then over at Paldea, well, Steve, you got an easy one this time up there at the top. I think it's pretty obvious what you're looking at.
Yes, definitely a highlight for the week is going to be the Newport Noctowls and Akron Agrons. The 1 and 2 teams that we've had, they have been spectacular so far this season. It'll be interesting to see how they fare against each other. Very important matchup, and a win here could determine the number 1 seed for the conference moving forward.
And on a potentially lesser note, but still, I think very much newsworthy, is the Close Combat Club and the Wooper Troopers down there. Both teams kind of on their last legs here. They really both need to win out. Troopers maybe have that tiny bit of leeway, but not really. I think the team that loses here is going to be eliminated. This is both these teams' last chance to get into the playoffs. They're going to need to start here, even if it is a long road. This is where you start. So that's going to do it for Week 6. Don't forget to check out the feature match on this channel done by Fruit Taco or Michael. And join us again next week for Week 7 as we start to wrap up the regular season. We'll see you then.